This budget contains no concerted or thought-through effort to address the very real poverty that afflicts our society. 1 in 9 children in Ireland lives in poverty, but there is no concerted effort here to address this monumental waste of human potential. We will only truly address the problem of poverty when we extend the ladder of opportunity to every family in the state and to break the intergenerational cycle of poverty. We will do that when we ensure that people who can work can access the educational and training opportunities and the childcare and the other supports that are necessary to make the transition into the workplace. The existing social welfare code doesn't do that. In fact, it traps people in poverty through schemes such as the rent allowance or the one-parent family payment. By not offering people real opportunities to train and by its hopelessly inadequate childcare system. The proposal to cut the funding for community creches is typical of the small-minded, cheese-paring, myopic attitude that has driven social policy for too long. My colleague Deputy Burton referred yesterday to a number of the reforms the government could have made but didn't. Tackling the poverty trap, that is the rent allowance, reforming the lone parents payment, introducing a supplementary child benefit payment for people on low incomes, including the working poor. These are the kind of measures that were needed to be introduced. But perhaps the most abject and pathetic element in this budget is the paragraph on medical cards. The government says it wants to increase the number of medical cards for families with young children and for families who have a child with an intellectual disability. But it says it can't because it has to conduct what it calls a data collection exercise and a review of the eligibility criteria for medical cards. This is very fine English. What it actually means is that they want to give out more medical cards, but that they don't know how to do it. Now, Taoiseach, please go and tell a mother working on a low income, whose child is running a high fever, and who knows that she can't afford the 50 or 60 euro doctor's fee, that you don't know how to give her a medical card. The net effect of this budget is to essentially freeze public services for a year. The allocation of improved services in health is so small that the HSE will probably not notice they have it. It amounts to 6 days of spending on the health services. Other departments, including the vital areas of education and justice, are getting paltry amounts for additional services. This in an economy which, after 15 years of growth, has a crumbling health service and crumbling schools. Indeed, it is striking that in health, in education and in justice, the money for additional services is contingent on something called savings in other areas. There is an entire section on what is called an efficiency review. But why is the rollout of cancer screening to be dependent on tight control of the number of pencils that the Department of Health buys? The same department that can't figure out who has and who doesn't have a medical card. All of these references, with which the budget statement is peppered to savings in other areas, look to me like cutbacks on a timer. I do not expect the government to change everything overnight, but I expect them to have a reform agenda. To say, this is what we want to do and that this is the first instalment. Even that would constitute a social dividend, but it is also absent from this budget. There is little enough to say about the tax package, because there's little enough in it. I want to comment, though, on one issue, which is individualisation. The indexation of tax bands has once again deepened the process of individualisation, but so too has the increase in the PAYE credit. For some years now, we have seen an increase in the PAYE credit alongside the personal credit as a cheap way of taking employees on low incomes out of the tax net. One consequence of this policy, however, is to further disadvantage one-income families, since the personal credit is doubled for one-income families, but the PAYE credit is not. This now amounts to €1,830 per annum. It also disadvantages the large number of people, particularly in construction, who are technically self-employed. I welcome the Minister's and the Taoiseach's conversion to the environment, though it would have been helpful had his government seen the light in time to meet our Kyoto commitments over the past 10 years. The greenest thing about last year's budget was a €270 million fund to purchase carbon credits from abroad. We were treated to a bit more hot air yesterday when the Minister said that all sectors of the economy must contribute as best they can to the necessary reductions in carbon emissions, but then proceeded to tackle only the soft touch of the private motorist. Where are the economy and society-wide changes championed by the Greens before they went into government? Where is your climate change legislation to put your targets, with which we agree, on a statutory basis? A carbon report is not a carbon budget, no matter how it is going to be spun. And what about a rebalancing of infrastructure spending in favour of public transport? Something indeed that would be very welcome. The sustainability of our economy is dependent on the sustainability of our environment. We need vision to go beyond what is immediately necessary and to anticipate the changes we will ultimately have to make. The vision of this budget does not reach that far. Increasing taxation on heavy CO2 emitting cars is a positive step. But is it enough to bring about a significant change in behaviour? What of those who have no choice but to travel by car because they do not have access to public transport? If your track record on delivering public transport infrastructure is anything to go by, relatively minor changes to VRT will not deter people who have to get to work by the only means available for years to come. €1 billion on replacing train carriages and commuter links are fine if people don't have to go to work until 2009 instead of Monday morning. Delivering reliable, efficient public transport infrastructure within the next few years, not the distant future, are what will bring about real behavioural change. You could start with purchasing 500 extra buses for Dublin, extending the Dublin bus network further into our new suburbs, and introducing a simple €1 adult fare for the Greater Dublin area, as was proposed by the Labour Party earlier this year. Reducing our carbon footprint has to go beyond fine words and expensive ad campaigns. People need practical, accessible tools to help them to make their own changes to their own homes and how they get around and where they get their energy. The Greener Homes scheme provided such support until the decision to slash its grants last September. Improvements in building standards are long overdue. But what will you do for the millions of existing homes which have already been built to poor specifications and which will continue to be expensive and carbon intensive to run? A €5 million pilot scheme on insulation will hardly cover its own administration costs. I urge you to overhaul the Greener Home scheme and to help people achieve lower whole house emissions. It should enable people to insulate their homes and to install renewable heating systems through a mixture of grant assistance and loan. Evidence has shown that Irish people will respond to practical environmental measures, so let's see more of them. Finally, the Minister said that €1.7 billion will be spent on energy next year, but omitted to specify how much of this will be spent on green energy and how much will be spent on coal and peat-burning power plants that will cost us millions in carbon credits for years to come. If this government wants to achieve its own target of a 33% share in the energy market for renewable energy, then they need to give a clear signal to renewable energy suppliers that they are serious about weaning Ireland off its fossil fuel addiction. This budget confirms once again that the government has long since run out of ideas. They simply have no concept of where they want to take our country or of what kind of society we should build. This is not a new budget for a new era. It is a budget for muddling through what it is hoped will be a temporary diversion from more of the same. The Minister, in his speech and in recent pronouncements, has shown some inclination to believing that he should have some kind of vision. But he just can't articulate what it might be, and he certainly isn't going to adjust policy to reflect it. There were references in his recent speech to Indecon, to something called equity, but certainly not to true equality. There was a lot of talk about productivity, which I applaud, but calling for higher productivity does not constitute a vision for society. There were references yesterday to the environment, but no sign of the economy-wide action on climate change. As a country, we have come a long way, but we've still a long way to go. We need a new sense of direction and a new purpose. I believe that we can set out an inspiring vision for what it is within our power to become, and that government can take the concrete steps that will further realise that vision. But we didn't get that yesterday. This was not a budget with a vision. This was not a budget, as the Taoiseach said, the first of something new. It was the 11th budget of a tired government. It was the budget of a Minister for Finance who has one eye on the Taoiseach beside him to see when he is leaving, and his other eye on his colleagues to see which of them are going to challenge. And if he had an eye on the back of his head, he would need it to keep an eye on the shifting sands of support behind him.